Because no real protective legislation existed after the war to prevent historical structures from being demolished, so much of our heritage was lost. After the establishment of the Intramuros administration, a major turning point for the heritage movement happened in the year 2000. Manila's historic Hayalay building was demolished despite a loud public clamor to preserve the structure. The intense Hayalay battle brought out the burning need for legislation to protect heritage. Finally, the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009, or Republic Act 10,066, passed into law. It outlined a strategy for maintaining Filipino identity while pursuing the following objectives. 1. Protect, preserve, conserve, and promote the nation's cultural heritage, its property and histories, and the ethnicity of local communities. 2. Establish and strengthen cultural institutions. And 3. Protect cultural workers and ensure their professional development and well-being. The law goes on to say, the state shall likewise endeavor to create a balanced atmosphere where the historic past coexists in harmony with modern society. It shall approach the problem of conservation in an integrated and holistic manner, cutting across all relevant disciplines and technologies. The state shall further administer the heritage resources in a spirit of stewardship for the inspiration and benefit of the present and future generations. The Heritage Act places responsibility for conserving heritage on the NCCA. What exactly is the heritage that RA 10,066 protects? It protects built heritage that falls into the following categories: national cultural treasures, important cultural properties, World Heritage Sites, National Historical Shrines, National Historical Monuments, and National Historical Landmarks. All structures 50 years or older are also presumed to be protected by the Heritage Act. All declared cultural properties are entitled to receive priority government funding for protection, conservation, and restoration. The National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or NHCP, oversees all heritage structures and places that are associated with a historical event or personage.
We try to make the public aware of important things that happened in our past, and one of them is by installing historical markers. We usually install markers in honor of historic figures or historic events or historic sites or historic structures. As modernization takes place in the country and greater degree of urbanization, many of these structures disappear. So at least if you have a marker there, then people or communities might be more persuaded not to destroy heritage structures.
The National Museum, on the other hand, oversees heritage structures that have outstanding cultural, artistic, and/or scientific value.
The National Museum exists to protect, preserve, and promote appreciation and awareness of the national patrimony of the Filipino people. It encompasses both the cultural sphere in the areas of archaeology and anthropology and fine arts, as well as built heritage, and also natural history. We occasionally declare really outstanding and significant cultural properties that are indispensable, shall we say, to the Filipino identity. We declare these as national cultural treasures.
Well, we can say that the heritage law is an exercise of police power. So there's a higher interest here. We're trying to protect the stories. We're trying to protect the future generations so that they'll understand what our society is based on those material evidence like that, cultural heritage, buildings.
Executive Order Number 80, issued in March 1999, transferred policy coordination for all cultural agencies to the NCCA. Among the agencies are the NHCP and the National Museum. NCCA is mandated by the Heritage Act to do a national inventory of heritage properties and to prepare guidelines for the conservation of heritage sites. Republic Act 10066 provides the national framework for conserving heritage that follows international standards but is tailored for the Philippine situation. Some outstanding examples of Philippine conservation that follow international standards exist. There is the classic retrofit, where a deteriorated structure is strengthened and brought back to its original stability. The retrofit of the Manila Cathedral is an excellent example of this method. Structural retrofitting beneath the surface was done with sophisticated engineering technology, aging finishing materials refurbished, and when completed, the structure looked as if nothing had been done to it. On the other hand, the reconstruction of damaged heritage is achieved after a detailed study in order to replicate the original construction method and materials of the damaged structure. The reconstruction of the intramuros walls is a fine example of this conservation technique. After research revealed the original source of the stone used to build the walls, the same quarries supplied the new stone for the reconstruction. Workers were then trained to use the same traditional methods to rebuild the walls. Although reconstruction in this manner is laborious and time-consuming, and of course, expensive, it is the preferred method for reconstruction. At present, the most challenging task facing cultural agencies is coming up with a viable plan to rebuild the churches in Bohol which were damaged by the 2013 earthquake.
There is a plan to plan, but that master plan has not yet been generated. The reason for that is because Phase 1 has not been completed. Well, Phase 1 is pre-restoration phase, no? That would involve clearing operations, retrieval operation. It involved documentation of the items, dismembered parts. No? Once that is completed, then Phase 1 is closed. Then we go to Phase 2. Phase 2 is the formulation of the master plan. But once you have the master plan, it needs to be cascaded to the different sites. So each site must have its own restoration plan that would follow the master plan.
Merong ilang churches po na naka-assign sa National Museum since they were declared as cultural heritage. One of this is Loon.
We are trying to recover everything and put everything into its proper place
Since they were already part of this our cultural heritage.
Why are the blocks being numbered?
So what we did, we tried to put a sign number, like Region 7, the year, and the code assigned for the Loon. And then, if ever they want to reuse again or they want to reconstruct the church, we know exactly where these stones came from.
I see. At the forefront of the different conservation methods is that of adaptive reuse.
Adaptive reuse is trying to find a new or contemporary use for an old structure or building that can be recycled. The problem is when you recycle, it is best to choose a use which is contemporary to the times but complementary to the building. For example, if you have an old church, in many countries abroad, they rehash it and it becomes a library. It becomes a bookstore. Therefore, you cannot make it into a bus station, no? Or a disco.
With minimum alteration to the heritage structure, we see houses change from residential to commercial, transforming former homes into restaurants, shops, or for other purposes.
A lot of people, what they do, they think adaptive reuse is just keeping the facade. That is not adaptive reuse. So adaptive reuse, you first look at the context of the building, what it was used for before, what you need to do now, and let's see if you can put it all together. But, of course, you respect the original building.
Before doing anything to a heritage structure, it is best to document it thoroughly to be able to determine its actual condition and to plan out the restoration process. Architectural documentation is done by teams, usually multidisciplinary, whose composition may vary according to specific structural needs. The same multidisciplinary group also carries out cultural mapping, which is an in-depth survey of the community to determine the lifestyle, history, and traditions of the residents.
You cannot just have old buildings as like museum pieces. You have to go and look into the context or the reasons why people built in such a way. So when you go into this, which is actually cultural mapping, you find out about their dances, their food, then you understand the culture of these people, and then you understand also the reasons why they need to be preserved.
Special community traditions may be a unique cuisine, particular fiesta practices, and special skills like pottery, weaving, that are not found in other neighborhoods. It is best that the original residents continue living in their neighborhoods while carrying out their traditional, everyday activities. Traditional activity maintains the feeling that everyday life goes on, that life did not suddenly change because their houses were designated as heritage houses. It makes the neighborhood feel authentic. Removing everyday life erases the story of the people living in a heritage neighborhood. It would be like moving out all of the Chinese medicine shops, family-run small restaurants, food stores, and all other local activity from Binondo and turning the district into a tourist destination.
So when you conserve, you're conserving also the history of the area around it, the neighborhood, because it was built for a certain reason.
Wanting to protect their unique historical character from vanishing, many heritage cities in the Philippines have passed local legislation much earlier than RA 10,066. The prime examples of successful conservation practice resulting from local heritage legislation are the historic city of Vigan and the rice terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras. Other examples are the province of Bohol and cities of Iloilo, Silay, and San Fernando, Pampanga. Local communities have an enormous stake in their heritage. Their participation is the key to successful conservation. Unfortunately, we have not fully explored the benefits that heritage can bring to a community. If sustainably conserved, heritage is an unrecognized resource for income generation for the community.
We used our conservation efforts as our tool for development.
Yes. Vigan is a shining example of this.
We were like the small city with big dreams. When I assumed office in 1995, there were 45.8% poverty incidence in Vigan, so almost half. Now we're down to 7%.
Congratulations.
We had to first show that conservation actually can bring them economic activities.
In return for the benefit received by the Vigan community from heritage, the people have learned how to sustainably care for it.
If we allowed this heritage to be destroyed, then where would the people of Vigan get their income?
The law is there to prevent the wanton destruction of our heritage. What's next to be done is providing the instruments and tools to help everyone involved.
To remove the vague provisions, to make clear the procedures.
Despite the many significant provisions of RA 10,066, many heritage advocates claim that the law still needs major improvements.
How can you help a poor developer, a poor owner, conserve their old property that's falling apart?
And we don't have the means to restore every single old house.
We're now working on the refinements, but we also want to include now incentives.
One single cultural agency What is happening in our law is that there are 2 or 3 or several culture agencies that cover different aspects of heritage.
The law should have specified that there is this body in charge of the heritage law and doing the coordination and given money for it.